questions with dubious answers, the trademark of an age of misinformation. After several recent changes in our lineup and coming up on the 2-year mark, we thought we'd thank all of you who have listened with the show dedicated entirely to your questions about where all this is going. Hopefully, our answers do better than what is commonly known as education in this country. As an After Dark episode, we depart from the typical heavy prep and enjoy a cocktail or 14 between us. Best consumed with the beverage of your choice and whilst not operating any heavy machinery. Listener discretion advised.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
The military-industrial complex.
A new world order.
But we are here to destroy the control over the industry of other people.
I did not trade arms for hostages.
Ich bin ein Tier.
Na полный разгром гнусных захватчиков.
Myth20c podcast.
Hello, we do a podcast. Welcome to the show. Very few people are here today, and we're doing a Q&A episode. The reason we're doing a Q&A episode is the same reason everyone does a fucking Q&A episode. It's because they don't have content. And we don't really have content this week. And the reason we don't have content this week happens to coincide with one of the most asked questions that we have received, which is, where the hell is Alex? Well, we don't know where Alex is. Maybe some of our listeners know where Alex is. They've perhaps run into him at their local Whole Foods or Walmart. And they can tell us what's going on here, because
you had a dream
we don't
about
know
him, didn't you?
I actually had several dreams. So the first dream, he actually explained why he left, but I couldn't remember it when I woke up. And then the second dream, it was just very banal. He showed up in our private chat and was in complete denial that anything had ever happened. And whenever he was asked directly about it, he just immediately changed the subject. But if this keeps happening, I think maybe I'm getting closer to the truth, and I can get to the bottom of this. And if I do, I'll let our listeners know. And it's sad. We had a good episode planned. Alex is doing the research for it. We're not sure what happened. It's also possibly defected to Russia. We have considered that possibility. And I don't know. A lot of people have asked about it. Lynn was asking about it because Alex and I were supposed to go on Lynn and James LaFawn's podcast to talk about the fiction of Robert E. Howard, which I will still be doing. Unfortunately, Alex will not be joining me. Oh, yeah, by the way.
Alex, if you're listening, just reach out, let us know you're okay. And we hope you are okay.
Yeah, no hard feelings. We just didn't know if we pissed you off or something. I don't think we did anything intentional. We definitely, from what I've talked to everybody here, we didn't mean anything. But let us know if you're out there, please.
Yeah, please. I don't know, guys. This is the episode where we drink alcohol, or at least where Hank and I drink alcohol, and Adam gets mad at us.
It's going to be a designated driver in these types of situations, and never thanked for it. But nonetheless, I'll continue on.
Well, actually, I'd like to
take
this moment to thank Adam, actually, in general, because
thank you for your service. You keep the show together. You keep it on.
No, exactly. That's where I was going.
That's very much appreciated. If
It
was just Nick and me, it would just be 3 hours of shit posting a week, and
it was just Hank and I would get
wants to
raided by
listen to
the ATF mid episode.
Thanks, guys.
But I was gonna say, what is this? What are we at? Do you know, Adam?
Episode 80. This is actually another question that we probably should address. What happened to Social Matter?
Before we get to that, I was gonna hold on. I'm thanking you, dude. I'm fucking thanking you.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
We're doing this gratitude moment. We're gonna get sentimental here for a second.
This is rare, so keep your
this is rare stuff. We don't usually. We like to maintain some distance from the current year. We try to do serious history show, and I think we've gotten a bit better at it. Thanks to all of our listeners who've hung in there with us. It's we're improving, and you know what? We got a lot of good content down the line. We all have planned. We got some good things for you guys. So thank you a bunch. But I'd like to thank Adam. Adam, all of our editing, and he puts a lot of work into it. And the show would absolutely not
godly amounts of time. Like, thanks, Adam.
It would not be possible without.
Thanks. I mean, if anybody listens to this on just audio only, we do have a YouTube channel for now. We're also on BitChute and archive.org, and now Thermidor. I'll let Nick get to that later. But in order to maintain all those platforms and also update people on Twitter and things like that, it's a very time-consuming process, and it's not all terrible. I do actually learn a little bit more because after we record the show, then I have to go over it again, which is actually very edifying. But it is very intensive, and so on the YouTube channel there are a lot of visuals that tie into what we're talking about. So if you ever hear us talking about something that is very obscure and difficult to understand, I do my best to try to find like a chart or a map or an image of the person we're talking about or some photo that reveals something. So there is a component to that if you're audio only, I think is useful. And so that's why I put so much time into it. And it's a lot of work. So thank you guys for appreciating that. And I want to thank my co-hosts as well for also putting up with me, because I'm very serious, because I care about this stuff, and I'm not doing this because it's some money maker for us. It's basically I really do feel the country is in trouble, and our people are in trouble, and I couldn't really look at myself in the mirror if I wasn't doing something about it. So I want to thank my co-hosts who are probably doing this a little bit more for fun and also just as an escape, for putting up with my obsessiveness. But I think we balance each other out. I think Nick is a very charming fellow. He's very passionate about a lot of things. Hank is a very knowledgeable guy. Hans is very articulate for his age especially. And Alex is a smart guy. So if he ever comes back, Well, I don't know if we're going to have him back, but he's got to explain himself a little bit, first of all. But yeah, we'll try to figure this out. But yeah, I'm very grateful to be part of this show, and I consider all of you my friends.
So why aren't we on Social Matter anymore?
Oh, great question, Hank. Why aren't we on Social Matter anymore? I heard it had something to do with the fucking Canadians, but I'm not sure.
No. That's one of the primary myths of the 20th century. I think they're shifting their content focus to different sorts of content, and I think in general we cuss too much for the program, for their program. So we wish them all the best as well. But it seemed like that was not going to work out long term for us to have the kinds of freewheeling discussions about kind of content of unlimited scope.
I think we just have a different worldview, which is fine. And I think we have more in common than we don't have in common. But it was their call because it's their platform to have our content on there, and so we respect that. It was a little bit of a surprise, but it's not a big deal. We're on Thermidor now, which is a great platform.
And if anyone has trouble tracking down some past show through the various archives, Adam does a bang-up job of getting everything distributed everywhere. But if you can't find something, just PM me. I have backups for all of my backups. Right,
and this is ties into also what's ongoing. Archive.org has the MP3 really old archives, and the reason it doesn't have everything is twofold. One, we're appreciative that Thermidor is hosting us, and so they're always going to be the source for the latest MP3s. But for the old stuff, which takes time and probably money to host, they're not going to worry about that. So what I'm doing is I'm uploading to archive.org, but they have a really strict throttling process for uploads, and so it takes forever. So there's only about 40 episodes there, and I'm probably going to lag it at minimum a month or two from the latest anyway, but they're going to be there eventually if anybody wanted to find them.
So I got some questions from people. A friend of mine, let's see here, he asked quite a few questions. let's knock them out. Episode on Nam. Is it gonna happen?
I don't see why not.
Nam is huge. Like, you would never do something on like Nam per se, but there's definitely, actually, I've got the schedule right in front of me. There's a really good book that I've been meaning to have a show on about the war from like what Hanoi was actually trying to accomplish, like how they were modeling the Americans and vice versa.
That's a fascinating point of view too, because when I was first learning about some of the mishistories of the World War II era, it was refreshing to actually hear a documentary in English from the German point of view. I'd never seen that before, and it was fascinating. And so I would even go so far as to say it would be interesting to hear the North Vietnamese view, and maybe the Chinese or Russians even, but we probably could put some of those together.
You guys catch Ken Burns just put out a new documentary?
I will not watch that.
Well, I watched it because I had like a bunch of cleaning I had to do, and I needed. Yeah. I threw it on, and it was exactly what you'd expect. Like, complete. You gotta
understand, like, Ken Burns' primary audience is bored 9th graders. Like, that is the primary viewership of his programs.
Well, that was me before the internet. Like, I have VCR tapes of almost every documentary I could find on PBS because it was the only place you could find that information or misinformation, depending on your point of view.
And he doesn't do that bad of a job of collating.
No, he's a good kind of like documentarian.
Well, he's a good curator of photographs and things like that for first-hand sources, but the narrative he weaves is always overly sentimental and just
right, and you can see like the high school syllabus. Like, okay, well, it's 10 episodes, so we've got to have one on the blacks, the Latinos, and the women. Sigh. We have to have like 1 or 2 for the aftermath, 1 or 2 for the lead up. Like, it's all very paint by numbers, and it ties into this whole narrative. It's this like this kind of fake notion of balance that, like, well, you know, we might have gotten in there for some lies, but then there were a lot of people that got emotionally invested in it, and, you know, their story is important too. And let's look at the guy on the ground and his experience. Like, its balance and its nuance actually are its major failings.
Well, and its obsession,
not freaking nuanced, and you can actually make good cases that don't try to like literally hit every base in this kind of like, you know, Technicolor day glow neutral off-white color palette.
Right. The moral center, though, of every Ken Burns documentary is the glorification of victimhood and the extent to which that nuance is extended to both sides. Like, I was really sick once. I think I had like the flu or something, and I watched his Civil War documentary as a way to sort of expel the virus from my body. So like a heat treatment or pain therapy. Because I was like, you know, it's basically like, oh, once this is over, I'll be well, right? I mean, because this is really long and terrible and painful and boring. And it actually worked. I mean, once it was done, I was better. So I guess it's health tips from our show here. But no, man, I mean, the whole, when he extends that nuance, the nuance is always like, oh, well, they were victims too. You know, the other side, they were victims.
Yeah, because it's a fucking war. Like,
right, of course.
Like, pretty much, like, a bunch of people on all sides end up dying. So, like,
well, he never extends that nuance and that understanding to the conqueror, and that's especially applicable in Vietnam. It was just total trash. But yes, we'll do Vietnam content. I'm going to cover the Phoenix program for sure. I think Hank and I are both fans of what's his name's book, Kill Anything That Moves. I forget the guy's name.
That's a great book.
We'll talk about My Lai, and we'll talk about Phoenix. Maybe we'll talk about the evacuation of Saigon. When dealing with like big historical topics, I've had. I guess this jumps ahead. I can't remember if it was on our Twitter feed. It was asked, but I'm just gonna. People I think someone privately asked me about this. World War II content, particularly Third Reich content. Yes, we're getting to it. The problem is we don't like to, 20th century, that's our focus here. We have 100 years, and there are a couple key events that you could make just hundreds of hours of content about. So we never want to limit ourselves to make like a definitive overview of one of these big issues. We like to, attack a small bit. So I can tell you one thing I'm working on in my back pocket. I have a couple things ahead of it. I'm going to do an episode on the Nuremberg trials. But that's how I'd like to approach it. I also have some notes for a episode on the crushing of Japan in the Second World War. So these kinds of, we want to take narrow focus. So yes, there will be content on Vietnam, multiple content on Vietnam, but it will be narrowly focused because we don't want to do something. We're not going to do episode whatever 188 on the Vietnam War, the episode. And I think that answers, because my friend who sent me these questions, he has questions of similar nature, so you should apply that. He asked about episode of Soviet Olympic athletes 1950 to 1990, basically an Ivan Drago episode. Possible, never considered.
A steroids episode?
No, just like Soviet Olympic athletes. There is an interesting, I would recommend people check out, I think it's called can't remember the name of the documentary, but there's a really good documentary on the water polo match between the USSR and Hungary.
Yeah, that's the blood in the water.
Blood in the water match, exactly.
Water polo is such a vicious sport. I mean, what goes on underneath the surface? They carry razor blades in their toes, and it's nasty.
It's basically a cockfight.
Yeah, water polo was fucking rough. I did not enjoy it. It was not a fun sport, but you did get in good shape doing it. But yeah, the blood in the water fight was because the Hungary was being absorbed into the Soviet Union, so it was a very brutal match that took place on the eve of that, basically. And I recommend that. Maybe I don't know, maybe do an episode on like Cold War water polo in the Olympics. Who knows? Episode about
we've actually done comparatively little on.
Oh, there's so much Cold War content we can do. Surgical nuclear nuclear standoffs between Soviet Union and Commie China, possible. Yeah. Adam, this is something maybe
incident
you would have something to say about. He asks about Pirates of Silicon Valley.
Oh, that's a fantastic
Apple
movie
versus Gates and Microsoft, IBM, that kind of stuff.
Well, I'll just say right now, the first time I saw that movie,
is that a movie?
Actually, yeah, it came out,
heard of that.
I think, around 99. It was during the dot-com era, and it was kind of interesting because it was looking at the previous boom in Silicon Valley, which is basically the personal computer era, when the 80s and the late 70s, early 80s, when the PC and Mac were basically the hot technologies. And I'm trying to look for a historical allegory that goes back to Greece or something, but basically it was maybe the Cain and Abel of the tech industry at the time was Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and so it frames the entire era around those two titans and their respective empires of closed systems, vertical integration versus cross-platform, Bill Gates, Microsoft land. And the acting is very good, and actually I would say it surpassed that. I mean, it preceded the subsequent movie with Ashton Kutcher, but in the case of Pirates of Silicon Valley, Noah Wyle portrays Steve Jobs, and I thought he did a great job, and I think the movie overall was much more relevant because it portrayed the Microsoft side of things, and it wasn't just this worship of Jobs, because if you remember, after Jobs died, everybody was sort of worshiping him even more so than they do of somebody like Elon Musk. And we also forget that Bill Gates was also a huge factor until he basically got sued by the U.S. government and stepped down. But it was a very good movie, and it really impacted me a lot because it told me a lot about what was going on in the business and technology world during the 80s. If that's relevant to any of you, I don't know. But to me, it was a pretty impressive movie.
An episode about European Americans, as the true pioneers of real conservation / ecology. Yeah, I personally would like to do more eco-fascist content. Probably not a lot more, but at least one episode maybe dedicated to maybe a kind of a dual episode, one dedicated to what happened with the Green Movement, who its supporters were, and then sort of the history of conservationism and deep ecology on the right. That could easily be an episode. Episode on Werner von Braun, absolutely. I think that would be a great episode.
Yeah.
Episode on Eva Braun, probably not.
No,
I don't think she's very important.
There.
Yeah. Shall you do an episode about the Red Baron? Probably not. I mean, maybe an episode on just aerial warfare in the Second World War. That would be good.
That was the First World War, I believe.
Oh, yeah, right. Red Baron was the First World War. I was thinking of who was the flying ace.
I mean, it was kind of an interesting era. I don't know how historically relevant it is, but it certainly was like the true cowboy days of aviation, because these guys literally were wearing goggles and scarves and shooting at each other, and their planes were made out of balsa wood. I mean, it was insane. And they had machine guns attached to these things, timed to shoot through the propellers.
The reason why we're able to do this show is because we find a lot of this stuff interesting. So if there's a question of like, hey, are you guys going to do a show on X? The answer is probably like, yeah, at some point, like, that's probably an interesting topic, or at least there's interesting aspects that we fold into something bigger. But like, all this stuff is like kind of intrinsically interesting to us. So by default, the answer is going to be yeah.
Yeah, usually rolls
send us ideas, or like especially interesting books that you think would make for kind of good sources or good content.
Yeah, well, here's how it works. We write it down, and then just FYI, we have over like 600. So give us 12 years, and we'll get through it. But it's like we're not able to keep up, basically. And so we have to prioritize.
I mean, the way I operate, like, I've been a little bit tied up recently. I'll be producing a lot of content next couple months, but I follow my own sort of pattern of studying things. I read and research things that are interesting to me, and I follow certain threads. And when those threads become a coherent idea for an episode, then it becomes an episode. And it's hard to say when these things would happen. It depends on kind of what threads, or at least on my end, what threads I end up going down and what interests me at the time. I mean, it's all up in the air, but yeah, as Hank was saying, it's all good content ideas. My buddy, he just had like 3 more of these would you do an episode, so I'll just throw it out there. International Harvester Company or American Motors Corporation. I don't know. It seems like something Adam would be interested in.
It's funny enough. I have a book on the earth moving equipment industry. It sounds boring, but it actually, if you understand what these machines are, they're actually pretty impressive pieces of engineering, and they're also pivotal parts of what makes our industrial economy even possible.
Yeah.
Think about all the roads we have.
Just, look into like what you need to do to just like work a 40-acre plot. Like, holy shit! Like, that is an extremely capital-intensive endeavor now. That's not like a dude with a mule anymore. That's multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment. That would be a cool show.
Well, I'm fascinated. I asked Adam at one point if he had seen Koyaanisqatsi, and he hadn't. Hank, have you ever seen that?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. There's 2 kinds of people. The kinds of people who have seen Koyaanisqatsi and like vaguely remember it, and people who
the kind who watch it once a year, like me. But yeah. I don't know, man. The machine is just like something I'm in awe of, and it's fascinating to me. And that brings in my friend's last question, which is about like German progressive rock from 69 to 79.
No.
And no, there won't be a show about German progressive rock, but I'm a huge fan of like Kraftwerk and New and those kinds of groups. I love that stuff. La Dusseldorf, awesome stuff. That's it for my buddy. I guess another mutual friend of some of ours asked a question. This one's like, kind of a serious like ideological question. He asked about this whole. I don't think we're necessarily the best people to ask about this, but it's a question and we're going to answer it. He said, for branding purposes, our ideas need a name, so what should it be? And our friend in question, he considers himself a white nationalist and has a positive attitude towards that term as a descriptor of ideological content. So
I like the term European, to be honest. I think that defines more of what our people are rather than being white, which is, I'm not going to agree with it. It's a social construct, but it's kind of a new thing. And so I think there's more depth to calling yourself European. And you can also obviously connect yourself to the continent of Europe. Now, what do you do if you're not on the continent of Europe is a broader question. And maybe that's where the term white becomes more relevant. But I think you're more open to attack in some ways when you describe yourself that way. At the same time, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like, is there an Asian nationalist concept? I never really thought of it this way, but it actually is kind of absurd if you think about it. Or a black nationalist. It really only makes sense in a place like America, which has actually no roots. There are obviously people who've been here for X number of period longer than other people, but it's a tricky one. So those are my thoughts on it.
I'll stick with Republican. Or like libertarian.
That was like a fascination thing after Trump won, and
libertarian
then kind
is
of
better
just
now. It's like, hey, like you into libertarianism? Like,
into smoking weed.
You have a lot of libertarian memorabilia from the Second World War. Like I think we're on the same page here.
I like white imperialist is I think a good description.
Is that a white supremacist or is that different?
No, like so in fairness, I would argue with like some of the content or some of the prepositions, I guess, of his question. Like the notion of branding makes sense when you are trying to do like a mass campaign, which is not the situation that we find ourselves in. So I would say that there's a large number of often oppositional ideologies that are kind of sharing a lot of space in the same kind of broad strokes memeplex, and it's fine to have different names for different sorts of things, and to change those names over time. Like, we're all smart guys, like we can follow along when something kind of falls out of favor because some asshole made it toxic.
Yeah, let me follow Hank here and try to give an honest answer to that. I mean, you have basically the exoteric and esoteric labeling. I mean, a thing is a thing is a thing is a thing. So whatever it is that you actually believe, however you understand the world to work, how it should work, you can find a description for that's most appropriate to it. Now, as to whether or not the branding, I mean, now you're talking mass politics, and mass politics is something I don't comment on. I don't care much about it. Don't have much faith in it. And no, I do not agree with, I think he's following the lead of, I guess, probably Greg Johnson, who thinks that the term white nationalist can be rehabilitated in some kind of democratic populist context. I don't think that it can. And that word would not describe my political ideology either. When you say a branding, I mean, that's kind of the thing. I mean, typically we describe, we're going out of our thing here a little bit to answer this question, but I do appreciate it. I mean, we describe our show usually in general terms of dissident right. That's because even amongst us, we have ideological differences and different ways of looking at the world. And the thing about Dissident Right is not necessarily its descriptive power. It's just that people listening, you guys understand. I mean, everyone's on board with, in one way or another, with certain basic. We try not to belabor these basic premises. We don't run talking points about Negro crime stats and that kind of stuff. That's not what we do here. We're interested in understanding history, understand the most immediate history that put us in this situation that we're in now. And personally, my ideological perspective, I am for total world area and imperium, but I'd settle for less. It's not really what we're about here, is discussing that.
Next question.
I got a few. Did you have any more, Nick?
No, that's it, man. I mean, those are the two I have from friends of ours.
I don't feel the need to deconstruct my own ideology, but suffice to say, I think it falls short of total anything domination.
I'm starting to think of it. Your comment actually helped me think about this. None of us are that important. I think basically what we all need to understand is that we're only going to get through this together. And basically it shouldn't be that complicated. If you like a person, or if they like you, if you can work together, you're going to be stronger than if you are alone. And you need to find more people that you can get along with, that you're going to leverage yourself in your life so you can be successful. That's really the only way that anything works. Worrying about branding, worrying about what polo shirt we should wear, it's kind of, we're missing the point. We need to find good people. That's the point, I think.
Yeah, I agree with Adam. At the end of the day, I mean, I'm half joking to a certain extent here. Insofar as I think the problem of our age is that the degradation that has happened to Western civilization puts us in a situation where the raw human materials we have to work with are very limited. We have a people who are. It tends. I think everyone understands this, but we're in a situation, and this is why we don't do a current affairs show, because it's very bleak to discuss this fact. But the reality is that the people who are most inclined towards, a serious dissension from the order that has been imposed from Washington, D.C. and elsewhere are people who tend to have a shit lot in life, perhaps antisocial tendencies or even psychopathy. And it's not to say you couldn't politically do something with those people, but it's not going to be, the glorious empire of the sun that some people would like to see happen. I think we've gone a little bit past the point of return, at least from the American perspective, in my opinion.
Next question, for the love of God.
All right, so we're we'll see how long we go for, but we're going to try to get through as many of these as possible. So no particular
It's supposed
order.
to be a lighthearted and fun episode. So thanks for that, David.
Christ, guys.
That's what you get when you ask for
Where
Q&A.
do you just see things going, man?
What does it all mean? All right, so this came in from, thank God it's in, so Twitter shows the Unicode version of the person's name, which is in Greek, okay? I guess this is sort of why he's asking this. And then
Is this about the ziggurats?
The Latin one. No, that's somebody else. You can take that one. I didn't quite understand it. But this is from Achilles.
I agree with Ziggurat guy, by the way.
Good.
We'll get there.
Let me just ask the question. It's not appropriate to be asking first century questions in this 20th century venue, but which is your preference, the Roman Empire or the Greek city-states?
Okay, so the first thing you have to do is read the Kagans in general are a loathsome bunch. However, if you read Don Kagan's book, The Peloponnesian War, it will hopefully disabuse you of a notion that the Greek city-states were, homogeneous, or that they were kind of a discrete thing. there's like a lot of actual parallels between the Athenian kind of proto-empire and the current American neoliberal empire. There really is no kind of post-Greek historical parallel for the Spartan Empire, because they were kind of, their own thing that had technological limitations and scaling limitations and all sorts of stuff. But like that's not a model. That's kind of a descriptor. You can't like structure your society like Greek city-states unless you happen to be like a Greek circa 400 BC or whatever. So I challenge the precept of the question. You can do a lot of analysis of different events in Greek and Roman history. Like God knows the founders did. They did like a fairly decent job of setting up governing institutions that tried to kind of deal with some of the problems that caused the collapse of the Roman Republic. But I mean, like, these models aren't models. Like, they're not applicable. All you can do is take little bits and pieces of analysis that really, more than anything, speak to fundamental human nature, rather than like some kind of abstracted notion of political governance.
Well, we are going to be talking about Bronze Age pervert, I believe, at some point. So maybe this is an appropriate transition to that. His book, which recently came out, Bronze Age Mindset, I think takes the side of the Greeks in this argument, that they were the closest to the masculine order ideal that's ever been achieved in human history. And it was something that I can't speak to it like he can, but I think the reason he says it is such an ideal is because all the sort of frustrations that seem to be cropping up in our modern world seem to be stemming from the fact that we're being domesticated, and the freedom that was probably on most display was can be easily seen in somebody like the Spartans, and to a lesser extent the other Greek city-states. And I think the rules and strictures that in some ways are related to what the Roman model was about are limiting our ability to achieve our personal potentials. So I think that would be his case, not necessarily my argument. I have other thoughts on this, but I think the way to sort of think about it yourself, just to make this question another question, is where would you rather live? And I think that's sort of an individual thing. It's kind of a subjective thing. It's like, would you rather live in the time of the Greeks, or would you rather live in the time of the Romans? I personally don't know. It really depends on what station you're in. I mean, if you're a slave in in either place, it's probably not the best. But if you like geometry, you probably go with the Greeks. If you like militarism, you probably love the Romans, or civil engineering or something like that. But it really depends on the individual, I think.
Yeah, I recently read his book, and it was a great book of freedom and power. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I would say, as far as an either-or question about the Greeks and the Romans, well, as a part of the Western culture, I mean, there is a contiguous line. It's, as they say, it's the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome. I think that, history moves on, and maybe, as Bap would point out, that the ancients in the Greek city-states were closer to the source and to the godlike ideal, to man, to actualizing the potential of the higher man as a godlike being. That very well may be true. As for Rome, I think that the Roman Imperium was the most metal expression of Western power in all of history. So, I don't know. Would you like to live, in either or? I mean, live as what? Live as an ant, as a peasant, or live as an emperor, as a king. I mean, either way, I mean, to be king is good. So I don't know if there were more limitations to actualizing the power of man in Rome as compared to Greece. But with that being said, I personally, I would have to go with the Roman Imperium. That's just me.
All right, you guys want another question?
Hit us.
Sure.
So I guess this is appropriate. Have you ever considered doing a show on the Risorgimento and its consequences for southern Italy? So I guess that's sort of the remnants of some of the empire, but they also were invaded, and I guess that's part of the question. The show we did on Italy covered actually a lot of the mafia in southern Italy, so that may cover some of this questioner's thoughts on the subject. But what do you guys think about that topic?
I'm woefully underinformed on that, so I literally can't speak to it at all.
Yeah, it's a 19th century thing, I think.
Not something I know a lot about either, so I can't really speak to it. I would certainly, someone wanted to send content, source material.
We basically did do some work on that. It was an Alex research project, and it was the Risorgimento was basically, I think, the reunification of the country under Garibaldi, if I'm not screwing that up completely. But it was basically this sort of effort for people to rekindle some of the sort of past glories of the Italian people, I think. So, but I don't know as it pertains to the southern states, and like I said, I might be getting this completely wrong, because the South and the North had some rivalries, and there were some very bizarre politics going on where the South wanted to reunify and the North wanted to stay away from that, and that's sort of, you're seeing that today with the Northern League and the sort of more wealthy parts of Italy in the North not wanting to have anything to do with the South. And then what the Southerners seemed to be doing during the reunification was trying to grab some of that wealth for themselves through the conduit of Rome in the middle. But that's my really cursory understanding of what happened there.
I actually would like to make an addendum to the last question. I would say in a historical context, I think the Roman Imperium, but in a mythological context, to live in the time, however distant or unreal that time is, the time of Odysseus and the time of the Iliad, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I could see it being Socrates or Diogenes at the very least, and enjoying it, Nick.
I would enjoy the Diogenes life for sure.
Yeah. All right. There's another question from American Roman. I guess he would prefer the Roman Empire. Was there ever a time and place when and where what we call the news media reported information as completely objectively and honestly as possible?
No.
Yes.
Follow-up question. Chomsky likes to point to the local leftist newspapers that dotted Europe and North America as coming close, but I don't exactly buy that. Okay, so you guys defend your points.
All right, so I'll go with the existence theorem and let Nick try to contradict me here. So what we currently know as the news media is a really bizarre kind of joint collection of it used to be profitable, and then people realized that it was profitable and exploitable for political ends, and then all the money kind of drained out of it because of Google. And now it's just like Jeff Bezos buys the husk of the Washington Post and wears it as a skin suit to promote God only knows what evil end. But if you want actual quote-unquote reporting of objective truth, yeah, you can pay a very good amount of money and get reporting of objective truth from areas and about topics that you care about. It's just not quote-unquote the news anymore. You're paying a very good amount of money to receive reports from a person that you personally trust, that you're paying a subscription to, for instance. So this exists in the kind of financial and economic media. It exists actually in the foreign policy media as well, or sort of like people with known affiliations and biases that are explicitly operating in that paradigm. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like the news at like qua the news, yeah, it's all shit. It's always been shit. But if you want information, there's never been a better time to get good, explicitly parameterized information about something that you care about
than today. Yeah, I think today we're actually in a renaissance for information.
I actually completely agree with Hank. I mean, I think the dissension there, the no and the yes, comes from when I hear news media, I think of it as a civic institution. And he referenced Chomsky said something about like the small socialist papers or something. What was it?
Leftist newspapers that dotted Europe and North America.
Yeah, I'm sure like the fucking like Lipschitz Times was great back in the day. Chomsky, like tell us another one.
Yeah, right. Tell us another. Yeah. No, the myth of the news as this neutral. I mean, the kinds of stuff. If you've ever taken like journalism classes or anything like that, the myth of the neutral, objective reporting. I mean, it's always been bullshit. The major papers in America have always been owned by the various oligarchs.
Oh yeah, look at all the wars we got into backed by the stupid newspaper headlines. Remember the Maine, and the day will live in infamy. I mean, all this bullshit, was concocted by the elite.
Yeah, and prior to the age of democracy, there wasn't a need for your average peasant to know about the affairs of the courts and the king. I mean, this wasn't a thing. So I mean, the news, the idea of news and media as a civic institution goes hand in hand with the other myths of democracy, of the information-driven, rational citizen who's going to participate based on the facts. Man, democracy dies in darkness, don't you know? No, it's all bullshit. I mean, my favorite newsman of the American scene from the 20th century, well, my favorite newsman would be H.L. Mencken.
Mine would be Norm Macdonald.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, he did Weekend Update on SNL.
Yeah, like, was that what Dennis Miller did back in the 80s?
Yeah. Kevin and all these different types, but Norm was by far the best.
No, yeah, news media, like, it's never been a thing. I think Hank's completely right. There's plenty of avenues for which there's specified, specialized sources of information. The more narrow you get, the more accurate it's going to get. The more that there's a question of, worldview and bigger picture stuff, like, say, like, foreign affairs, foreign policy, those kinds of publications, you're going to get into trouble. But the more narrow you get, I think insurance-based like information, reporters or researchers for like insurance firms, they tend to be pretty sound. Not really relevant to the average man, but yes.
Yeah. I mean, in general, if you want to figure out, okay, which source of information do I trust? Like, look for people that actually change their actions based on what that information source says.
Skin in the game.
Exactly. Like, this happens all the time in the financial media. It happens all the time in kind of foreign policy or foreign reporting contexts. It doesn't happen at all in sports. I don't know, maybe if you're a bookie or something. But, like, if you're talking domestic politics, for instance, like, under what possible circumstances would you actually change your actions based on a story in the failing New York Times?
Well,
if anything, you would use this contrary indicator.
most of this stuff is propaganda designed for the masses. If you're, the joke in Wall Street is if you're getting your stock tips from the Wall Street Journal, you're too late. This stuff is, and you can see that even worse in, television, financial news like CNBC. But these people are there to manipulate you. And there are actually a lot, unfortunately, of people who work at a sort of low level in Wall Street who pay attention to that garbage. But the top level operators, they have inside information, they know people, and they never share that information with anybody else. And so I would say it's probably very similar. I'm almost certain it's very similar in Washington. They call it the back channels and things like that. You're not going to have access to that. So I think for the little people, you have to basically talk to people on the ground and use, to a certain degree, social networking, social media tools, but just, be very careful about filtering that. But it's a hard question to sort of generally answer, because it's like, consider the source. What are their motivations? And as Hank said, it's like you need to understand, are they actually acting on what they're saying? And if they're not, it's probably not that useful.
Well, you can't. It's categorically like you could not have objective news, so-called news reporting, if it wasn't entirely open source. Like you couldn't. You would have to have access to all of the source material that these people are reporting on. They would have to provide that to you.
Yeah, which like even the good people do not. So I mean, but the thing is that the people who are actually worth paying for, the people who are worth listening to, they develop their own credibility, and like their credibility is ascribed to them personally. Like, the whole The Economist thing about how, we don't have author attribution because The Economist is our brand. Like, that tells you everything that you need to know about their credibility, because if somebody writes a load of horse shit, they rely on the accrued weight of whatever is not actively disprovable to outweigh that.
Well, exactly, Hank. But this is where you get into CIA type spookery, is because that credibility becomes a currency for higher levels of disinformation. And the people that would immediately come to mind are people like Glenn Greenwald or CIA Moore Hirsch, where they establish, or the famous cases of Woodward and Bernstein.
Well, so like a lot of it gets so meta, because when when Glenn Greenwald or Seymour Hirsch writes something, that is in and of itself an interesting signal, because the story isn't like, oh well, according to this guy, like this thing happened. It's okay, well, the story is Seymour Hirsch claims this thing happened.
There you go. You ipso facto become part of the story by being somebody who's trading on credibility. And so, like, if you're now dealing with different tiers of disinformation and misdirection, which objectively people like Hirsch and Greenwald do engage in, it gets very meta, Hank.
Well, I think
going down this rabbit hole.
The generality of all these people being controlled by the intelligence services is probably, of course, not true. But I would say, in the examples given, I would tend to agree. I would say it's difficult to determine somebody's credibility without obviously a long track record. But in the cases of the people mentioned, and I think in the case of Chomsky, as it was asked before, I do think these people are actually built up by the system. And I think the way they do it is they're actually given special entree to present on topics at particular key points, whether it's a university or having a particular interview. I think a lot of it is source driven. I think a lot of people are selected to be given exclusive access to sources, and then they become the conduit that is then built up with this high credibility based on the sources they're given. And then at the same time, the problem with this is that even though you're getting that raw, source information through them, they, who are the conduit, have to worry about losing that access, and so they then become biased and not being able to tell as much truth as they could otherwise, because then they don't want to lose what they have in terms of privilege.
Assuming they're even motivated from telling the truth in the first place, what they're motivated by is the prestige of being, the true reporter.
I'm sure
The
they would
true
like to do both, but the
lies
reality
about
is
No,
a lot
they're
of
they're
this
both
stuff.
Jews, dude. Burn,
all,
they're
all
all
of these
Jews.
characters have
Everybody-
really interesting backstories and really interesting kind of affiliations that are first order or via their sources and their stories. And we could almost do whole shows on each of these people. So it really is like, Greenwald is an interesting guy, and there's been, well, you can't like discard it or just say like, oh well, clearly it's like Agent X, like that's running them. That would make it a little bit too pat. It really demands like fucking autistic levels of research and analysis of it, and kind of second order evaluations of credibility.
Yeah, it
And
gets
it's-
complicated, but what is simple that we do understand is that there are people like Greenwald and Hirsch, are the main examples we've given, who are chosen to be given, at times, very legitimate, privileged information. But then further from that, we understand that other information that are given may or may not be legitimate, and their credibility is established by being people who get legitimate information initially. So yeah, I mean, it's a whole mindfuck rabbit hole. But to get back to the central question, was there a time when like news media was a legitimate organization? No, I mean, it was, major newspapers were run by oligarchs, and it was always a way of controlling public opinion and disseminating information in a way advantageous to the power elite. I mean, that's not really a secret. It's as Hank said, to summarize, yeah, there were avenues of it. There have been and always will be avenues of reliable information, but those exist in a very narrow sense, and you usually have to pay for them.
Next question. Thoughts from Nick on Charles Lindbergh. Was the kidnapping a conspiracy? Did he do anything wrong? Thoughts from Hank. Well, okay, this is another question. So Lindbergh first.
Yeah,
That's
I don't know.
New
I mean,
Pliskin, by the way.
I don't know if it was. I've read some things to that effect. I can't comment on it. However, I can faithfully promise an episode on Lindbergh. I think Lindbergh. I really like biographical episodes. I think they're one of the best ways to approach 20th century history is to take really standout men and great figures from the 20th century and look at their lives and their intersection of their lives with the events of the 20th century, with history. So I can promise an episode on Lindbergh, and when we do that, I will get to that.
Okay, next question from New Pliskin. Hank, what do you think about tech culture in the 90s? Why so ostensibly libertarian at first, but 20 years later so global homo? Interesting question.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, I think the short answer is there was a concerted effort after the sort of takeoff of a lot of these institutions, really, to bring them back under control. You can almost gauge kind of the high watermark as I don't know, Google's IPO, but I mean you could go further back than that. Like Silicon Valley was founded to make radar tubes, like actual vacuum tubes for World War II. It's always had this crossover with the government because the government is such a immense funding source. And there was a very brief window of time when a lot of these technologies were developed that allowed much kind of more individual scale participation in communications and politics and economics. And once a lot of these things grew to a certain threshold, you saw a concerted effort to put people at key positions, to co-opt these institutions, to threaten them if necessary, to play nicely, and get them to be acting in the service of the existing system. So you can see this. Google is an excellent case where it's founded as this kind of kind of grad school writ large, very hedonistic, anarchist environment. And they bring on, pre-IPO, to kind of productionize them, Eric Schmidt, who is a hooked-up guy, an interesting guy. His discussion with Julian Assange, I thought, was very interesting, if you want to get a feeling for where Eric Schmidt is coming from. And eventually you end up with Google having basically a senior vice president in charge of color revolutions, and sending like a incredible number of senior engineers to basically do field work for either the Obama campaign and administration directly, or to try to make the signature Obama campaign program plank, which is to say the healthcare.org, serviceable. So, this is not unique to the tech sector. This is what happens in absolutely every breakout economic sector, where as soon as you have enough accrued economic power that you start to have political power, it goes one of two ways. Either you use that in order to demand influence within the system, or the system uses its political pull and its very control of that economic system to demand influence in your internal operation. And in the case of Silicon Valley, it was the latter.
I think that's true. I also think the nature of what Silicon Valley does is very different than what it started out doing. Originally, it was a hardware-oriented place. The term silicon refers to the fact that semiconductors were built using silicon. Now, I think Intel closed its last fab in the Valley some years ago. So there's really very little manufacturing that goes on there still. What it predominantly is a software and engineering design valley that is part of a very large global supply chain, but it also has oriented itself much more towards the social media and information management sector rather than just computing, which is basically very boring IBM scale stuff where you've got a bunch of accounts you need to reconcile at the bank. Then they got into mini computers and then personal computers, and things started broadening out from kind of the back office stuff into the front office stuff, and then finally into the hands of the consumer. And I think when the consumers got it, and especially when the women and the younger kids got it, it became Snapchat and all this nonsense, which is really trivial stuff on the surface. But if you're in the position of somebody like the elite who wants to manipulate the population through propaganda, with all the censorship that goes on in the social media platforms, then you start thinking about, okay, what is the agenda? And the agenda is globo homo. It is the Anglo-Zionist empire, to use the Saker's term. And how do they impose that? You weaken people by manipulating their sexual mores, and you do it with a bazillion other means of sin through lust and gluttony and everything else that is promoted today. And a lot of that is done through the internet. And so I think that is a vector for the powers that be to control the empire. And I think Silicon Valley became a very important focal point for that, even more so than Hollywood in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
If you want an interesting story, so there was a lot of scuttlebutt recently. Google had basically they had a contract to do image recognition, algorithm development that was like, obfuscation, et cetera, whatever, ellipsis, drone targeting solutions. And they had not a huge, but a very vocal internal revolt inside their company, where a lot of people were kind of attempting to speak to their internal ethos, and that this goes against our principles. Like, Google shouldn't be a a military contractor, etc. And it's interesting if you actually look at some of the backgrounds of some of the people that were involved in that, and you start counting exactly how many foreign citizens don't have a burning desire to have a large U.S. company working on United States military applications.
Well, that's the global part. I mean, that's why they're importing all these Chinese and Indian people to do basic engineering, which then turns into copying entire hard drives and getting on a flight to Shanghai. But that's another show, I guess.
I was getting some more vodka. I don't know shit about. I mean, these guys know way more about computers and technology than I do. Everything I know about computers and technology, I know from reading, William F. Gibson novels. So
Neurmancer.
Not a bad place to start, honestly.
Yeah,
it's not even a bad place to end.
Well, that's what frames for when I hear questions.
Just
like
don't
this.
end with Nick Land. I think you want to. That's a starting point, and then you got to look for other solutions.
We like Nick Land.
Definitely.
We're pro
Nick
too.
Land. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's. Hopefully, maybe we can get him on sometime. I don't know, but when I hear a question like that, I just think like, why is the, techno future cyberpunk dystopia like not what I had? Why is it so much more banal and effeminate than it was predicted? Because when you look at these, dystopian predictions of runaway technology that were put forward in the 80s and I guess early 90s, also what's his name, Neil Stephenson, his works too, as well as Philip K. Dick before that. Usually, I mean, you had like Tyrell Corp and things like. I mean, it was much more aggressive and anti-human vision.
Wayland Industries from the Alien series.
Yeah, from Alien. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Instead, we end up with this. It's this really gross, like Google putting up their various, whatever brown woman of the month on their
search results are straight up Orwellian censorship. I mean, you type in American inventor and all you get is the guy who discovered the peanut or something. It's like it's all black people. And it's not to say that there were never black inventors, but for God's sakes, they're not the majority. They're not even the majority of the population.
Black inventors.
Well, obviously, but
that's like unironically.
That's the absurdity of this company.
And what's interesting and really so when you're developing these kinds of systems, these kinds of bugs do pop up. But it's like, okay, so this has been a known thing that people have been just running propaganda on for years, I think now at this point, and they haven't bothered to fix it. And the reason that they haven't bothered to fix it is because exactly nobody at Google wants to get the ticket for the bug that when I search for American inventors, literally it's a 100% black page and actually does a thing to fix it and then has that fact recorded in the internal bug tracking database.
Well, Hank,
like it's straight up internal Maoism. It's fantastic.
Well, that's what can you run with my question on this too, Hank, because Adam mentioned the BAP book earlier, and there he makes a great point in that book about how the would-be tyrant kings of our time tend to be limited in their own ability to actualize and express the power that they have accrued, because they end up conforming to this, to the zeitgeist in a way. They can't step outside the lines and flex the power that they've established. They can't say, we are Google, submit. Instead, it's like, we're for human rights, equality, democracy kind of stuff. Why is it that we don't get that, cyberpunk dystopia from the William F. Gibson novels.
It is contextual. Like, you can look at legitimate dissidents and, you know, kind of follow their Twitter feeds as they're slowly cut off from funding source after funding source. Their email gets shut down. Like, they're effectively unpersoned in a way that, you know, given kind of the way that we actually interact now with each other, mimics Amish shunning on a you know, multiple hundred of million person scale.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the people who control these technologies. Why is it that they can't seem to step out of line and flex the power that they do in fact have? They have immense power, but they're unwilling.
They don't. Like,
well, they do it in these passive aggressive kind of feminine way. They don't you know, they don't do the whole, like, they don't build some ostentatious, like, incredibly ominous and creepy building with a giant, like, pyramid eye on top of it.
It's really funny. Don't they?
It depends. Like, no, I know what you're saying.
What if you build
they walk the line? I mean, they have
that circumscribe the Pentagon.
Yeah, I feel like we see it that way because we are inclined to look at it that way for what it is, but they don't flout it. Like, that's, to me, the key.
That's part of the ethos. But I mean, like, there's flaunting one's power, and then there's demonstrating one's power. Like, it's one thing if, like, you know, you're Genghis Khan, and every so often you just, like, point to somebody in the crowd and she's your, you know, 500th quote unquote wife, just to show your homies you still got it. But it's another thing to be able to really screw someone and to have it be known that you can do that and that it doesn't actually become widely public. It's only public to the people that it needs to be made aware to.
Well, I think there's an exception to this rule, and that exception is Larry Ellison from Oracle. There's a book titled "All Others Must Fail." You know, it's not enough for him to succeed. He really is also a really like good the book, Knicks archetype of like the evil billionaire.
Larry Ellison.
But did Larry Ellison, like, take the young wife of a senator openly and, like, you know?
No, but he has like sailboats called like Katana, and he has these just really aggressive cars in his driveway.
I mean, that's between like flaunting wealth and flaunting
but
power.
It goes on from there. I mean, you have to read all of the sort of historiography behind, which is not that important in the broader context. But there are these sort of like very flamboyant, I would say alpha male types in the tech industry, but they are more in the 80s. It's really become feminized. It has changed.
Okay, yeah. What's up, Adam, with Zuckerberg's like ugly chink wife? Like, what the fuck's the story?
I mean,
behind
given
that?
how ugly he is, I think that's as good as he could get.
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
given how powerful,
no, incorrect. So okay, like field trip opportunity. Anybody who's in like physically finds themselves located in Silicon Valley, just like get in an Uber, go to the neighborhood that has like all of the venture capital firms like lined up in shitty office parks, and just like walk into their lobby.
That'd be Sand Hill Road.
And leave, and just like do that about a half dozen times, and just keep a tally of like how much, like, you know, human office furniture is there.
Should you do this?
Like
should you do this in the
dirty Asian men who actually produce their product? Like, I mean, I have no idea how Zuck got himself into that arrangement. That's just completely bizarre to me. Not like even bizarre in like, you know, he has some sort of weird attachment thing. It's just, it defies all explanation.
The guy is a fucking weirdo. I mean, I'm not surprised at all. He met her in college, and I don't know. I can't imagine any woman. I've never heard a woman tell me that they're attracted to Mark Zuckerberg. They've told me the opposite.
Maybe this is like a one of those canonical flaunting of power things. It's like, I don't care about having a pretty wife. I don't give a shit if I have a pretty wife. I have, you know, whatever. Like, what's her name over there? Like, I'm like a human cruise missile focused on whatever the fuck
Yeah, but
actually cares about as a
but Hank,
primary value.
This is exactly the point, that power is supposed to be used to, actualize the apotheosis of the human lust and desire and potential.
So
it's
it's
not supposed to be used to just to assert subtly that, I control your peasant fucking lives. That's what's so gay about this whole system.
Now I'm gonna it's real Nick Land posting hours. The highest, the bizarre thing about Silicon Valley is that because of the scaling and the technology involved, the primacy of the exercise of power has as its own end the exercise of power. There's no there. It's pure systems of human control and domination for the sake of having those systems, because if you have that kind of a system, it's ipso facto self-perpetuating.
And thus you become a slave to it. As a participant in it. You're not a Nero. You're not a Caligula. You're a Zuck.
I mean, there are a few kind of. I mean, that's a style of participant in this economy itself, the swashbuckling leader, the high charisma senior vice president or VC or something. That's an archetype that exists.
Let me just level with you guys. Is it just me, or would you guys be less disturbed by the ruling order if these Hollywood Jews would just be executing Gentiles on top of their penthouse roofs and taking their wives?
I'm in favor of the formalization of power. There's a huge problem with people who exercise tremendous day-to-day power that have effectively zero skin in the game, really. It would be better, and I mean the reason that it's not formalized is because it would be better, it would be more recognizable, and there would be more feedback applied to it if they were recognized for the person in the position of power and responsibility that they fundamentally are. How much accountability is there to the however many people on, for instance, the Twitter Trust and Safety Council, that is it's not effectively, it literally was set up to be the censorship board for a major American media company.
Well,
you can look up their names, kind of, but does anybody track these people? What they
I think there's basically this divide that's happening. You've got essentially the old Hollywood portrayal of what a sort of a supervillain should look like. I mean, picture Darth Vader. Here's a 7-foot tall, sheathed in black guy who's a fucking badass at everything. Completely warrior-like, completely masculine in the sort of traditional sense. And then you have Mark Zuckerberg, you have Sergey Brin, you have Larry Page at Google. They're very, very weird, mild-mannered people who are very good at what they do. And I think there's the rub. The nature of our society has changed so much from the traditional alpha male-driven, I use my literal brute strength to succeed in the world, to whereas all that stuff is automated now, and basically the people who control the robots are now becoming the billionaires. I think that's why there's this bizarre disconnect. I think that's what you're expecting. You're expecting a Darth Vader to rule over you, and you don't have it.
It's not just Hollywood, and it's not just the masculine. I would point to the historical precedent of someone like Madame Bathory. I'm going to bathe in the blood of the prettiest virgins, that kind of thing. I mean, I think that the answer...
Implying that's not a literal thing.
Well, it's not an open thing. That's the... I think that if people were to exercise, if you're Bezos or you're Zuck, were to exercise power in an ostentatious way that gratifies their own personal lusts, publicly, it would be a threat to the cold monster that is the institution of Zog overall, because it thrives on that impersonal, total lack of skin in the game.
Well, that's right.
And even for an evil, for a wicked individual, for some evil Jew to start like openly slaughtering the husbands of the hobbits or whatever, and that kind of thing, like that would be a threat to the nature of the system itself.
Well, the system is oligarchic, and it's not controlled by any one entity. It's basically a various system of checks and balances. It's a balance of powers game. If you go back to like the European mindset of pre-World War I, where everything was sort of locked up, but there's no real dominant force in any one sector or any one individual. You could say the Jews probably have the most lock on wealth and power, but they are also divided. And so I think they all are the people at the top are very intelligent, and they realize that they need to work together in a cartel effectively. And that's why they go to all these places like Davos and Bilderberg or whatever. They work together.
But Adam, the point is, to what end is all of this when these people become captive to the system they've created? I mean, it
maintenance of their power,
like the nature of Zog, but power to what end? That's my point. Like
to the end of power. Like I swear this is like a fucking quote from 1984 or something. That like power is and like let's not forget that the exercise of power is satisfying, especially. Well, go on then.
I could become a serial killer tomorrow. Like I could. Like any one of our listeners, like you don't need vast quantities of wealth to have your will exercised above all others. Like you could go do this with your own life. I mean, yeah, you might get caught, but if you're smart, you wouldn't, and you would have at the end of the day more freedom of action than these people who are captives to the system. And these people are all spied on. I mean, the NSA watches Zuckerberg more than it watches people like us. They pay way more attention to these types of people. And like what Zog or the international money power system ultimately is an alliance of people with no skin in the game. And at the end of the day, without skin in the game, you can't truly reap the benefits of power. Like power without skin in the game means power without freedom to go with it. That's the way I look at it. But
that's an interesting point of view. I think maybe we'll close the question on that, and I have a few more questions.
Who asked this question?
Oh God, there's a lot of people here. This was This was New Pliskin. I've seen him on Twitter. He's good.
Thank you, New Pliskin, for sending us on a fucking 30-minute tangent.
Yeah, I mean, I could keep going, but I think we've got more to cover here.
We touched on this in previous shows too.
We do. We can keep going. What do you got next, Adam? What do you got in the bag?
All right, now I'm gonna.
What's in the bag?
More questions.
This is funny because this guy named Mango McAllis asks 10 questions or thereabouts, but I think he realized he was writing so many that he put 2 questions and he put the number in front of them as the same number. It was like 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm like, wait a minute. But so I'm going to read these
quick.
Trying
to sneak one in there, Mango.
All right, Mango. Let's lightning round this shit. What do you got, Adam?
All right. I think I should. We gotta limit our answers to like a paragraph, okay? And then
let's be pithy.
We'll just blaze through this because he can't dominate the rest of the show.
That's real laconic mindset here.
All right, ready?
Hank, what do you got to drink, Hank?
I am currently leering after simpler times.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I mean it's bottom of the barrel. It's real efficiency hours here, but I find it refreshing.
I got some Tito's vodka with the palm juice with the heart thing, in the oblong shape, the spheres.
I had some tea, but I ran out, so I'm just gonna keep going.
God damn it, dude.
Nick Mason's broad theories on JFK assassination. Well, keep it narrow. 30 seconds or less.
Okay, sure. I can do this in 30 seconds. So basically, we're going to do a complete 2-parter, maybe 3-parter on JFK assassination, including a history of the Kennedy family itself, which would probably be the first of a 3-part series. And I promise to get to this year, at least by December.
Okay.
No. I had 30 seconds. The broad theory, as I mentioned in a previous episode, is that it took place at the behest of a syndicate or confederation of various interests that go all the way from the CIA to organized crime to the fruit companies, to the Zionist state.
Okay, number 2. Let me just answer this one real quick. Considered Ron Unz as a guest. Well, that would be amazing. We even sent him an email asking if we could put the show up there to Nick's chagrin. But yeah, who the hell knows how to get in touch with him? I don't. I sent him an email.
Well, it wasn't my chagrin because I'm not a fan of Ron Unz. I actually like Ron Unz, and I'd be happy to have Ron Unz as a guest if anyone can make that happen. Maybe we could talk to Carlin about that, actually. Next question.
Whether Suez Crisis 1956 marked end of Britain as world power as per
Absolutely.
Peter Hitchens. Okay, yes,
Yeah.
good. There you go.
Yeah.
Number 4.
UK as a state, not necessarily UK elite.
Right.
Yeah, well, the UK international money power elites continue, but the UK as a formal empire, yes, that was the nail in the coffin.
Yeah,
And it was
I
also
think it was
them
the straw that killed the
opposing
camel's
the
back.
aspirations of a broader European unity. It was against their interest to do this, but they wanted to flex. As I pointed out, I think I mentioned this in the Mosley episode, but Mosley points this out, is that they wanted to flex on the behalf of a nostalgia for the lost empire in order to thwart something that was truly in European interests.
Cool. Mango question number 4, part 1. Phenomenon of childless leaders in Europe. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a self-perpetuating power in its own end thing. I mean, kids do take time, and if you're trying to climb that greasy pole, you have less time to do so after you have one kid, let alone, the 2, 3, 4, etc.
Yeah, to my knowledge, the leader of France, Germany, and Britain are all childless. I do not know about the other countries, but those are the top 3.
Again, I have BAP book on my mind, and it's, a true tyrant should have like a child with every fucking, the prettiest peasant girl in every village in the empire.
That's what Napoleon did.
Well, yeah, that's my point. It's like, again, what's the point of these people are they're slaves to their servants.
Two of those 3 are women. So I mean, like,
well, yeah, I mean, but women are not capable.
That's like an unnatural phenomenon in and of itself. Like the notion of like a 50-year-old like striver, childless woman as
she's a lesbian. Like, even if she doesn't munch rug, she is a lesbian. She's a spiritual lesbian. So,
but
next
regardless,
question.
like, I mean, what would like self-actualizing power look like in that situation? You I don't know, like you shack up with like David Hasselhoff.
I guess the best historical analogy of like a woman would be what's her name from Russia, who built the Hermitage?
Catherine the Great.
Catherine the Great, yeah. Yeah. She did the female sexual prerogative version of, she took like the best. She had all these boy toys from all over Russia who would come and visit her and provide her with her necessary satisfaction. Next question.
Part 2, considered episode on America First movement.
Yes, it would be. I mentioned earlier that I'm going to commit to doing a Lindbergh episode. When I do that, it will be America First will be covered extensively in that. Yeah. Happy to talk about people like E. E. Cummings, the great American poet, and others. So, next question.
Given the calls for the abolition of ICE by Dems and casual use of term treason, is U.S. inevitably heading for political crisis in 2020?
I don't know shit about politics.
I would say yes for a crisis in 2020. The rhetoric is not part of that. The crisis is structural. The rhetoric is just, it's hyperbole. None of these people, like, the point of the abolish ICE is to rile up, woke socialist cadres, I guess, like, so that they can be the meat that you send door to door to drive midterm turnout. You do it at this time because you need a couple of months in order to effectively organize them and to teach them not to effectively shit on the rug of the people that they're trying to convince before you send them out. Like, as of today, I think we're like 100 days out from the midterms. So, I mean, it's this very cynical ploy, but the crisis in 2020 is structural.
Could there be any circumstance in which dissolution of NATO would be realistic, or does the military-industrial complex wield far too much power?
Yeah. I mean,
yes.
Turkey goes rogue. It is the most likely by far scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, there's no provision in the NATO structure to eject a member. I mean, like, presumably, if Turkey decided that they were going to start some trouble, then they would elect not to invoke the Article whatever mutual defense provisions. If somebody got fed up with Turkish misbehavior and started something with them, and they elected to invoke those, and we elected not to get into some dumb shit war on behalf of Turkey, then that would dissolve the alliance easily. I mean, another scenario.
Why wouldn't they just let
it
Turkey go? I mean, really? Do they need Turkey that
let
badly?
Them go. Like, it's 100% to Turkey's benefit to be able to at least claim to be able to, call up their big brother to beat the shit out of whoever they pick to fight with. The question is, like, okay, so say they do start a fight. You obviously don't have an interest in intervening on their behalf. So do you do something very pro forma that preserves the structure of the thing for other parties? Or do you make it apparent that, like, you don't give a shit what happens about any of your dumb shit brothers?
All right, next question. Is it conceivable that there will be an attempt to create some... Well, let me read that again. Is it conceivable that there will be an attempt to create competing reverse currency by China, Russia, or more broadly, BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China? I guess they're still keeping South Africa in that, which is stupid. Or is petrodollar here to stay?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reserve currency thing is a little bit overstated. I model it as the fact that everything is routed through U.S. treasuries ends up being not really a subsidy to the treasury market per se. Like, I don't think that it lowers U.S. interest rates. What I think it does do is provides an implicit subsidy to the U.S. banking sector, because they're taking bid-ask spreads, they're taking transaction costs, portfolio management overhead, when those funds are routed through U.S. treasuries and U.S. securities more broadly.
Well,
Obviously,
I mean, the question is there an attempt to create competing reserve currency by China, Russia? There already is. I mean, it's not going to be in the future. It already happened. The question is, will it become replacement for the U.S. dollar vis-a-vis the oil economy? Probably not in the near term. I don't know. Who knows? But
not in the near midterm. Like, the U.S., even for all of its problems, the U.S. still has a lot of features in their real economy that make it a lot more worthwhile to invest in the U.S. Like, you can count on one hand the number of $100 million or more publicly traded companies that blew up just from, like, fraud in the U.S. It's a lot in China and Russia. So, I mean, that alone, like, the legal protections, even given the shitty state of our legal system, it works for commercial disputes much better than the Chinese or Russian systems. So, I mean, certainly not on, like, a 5-year or probably a 10-year time horizon, unless something pretty drastic happens to the U.S.
All right, number 9/10. Does popularity of J. Peterson, I think he means Jordan Peterson, appear to be precursor to spiritualist, perhaps not Christian, revivalist movement?
Yes.
No.
Let's have Nick take that one first, since Hank's been talking about the other ones.
I like that thing that keeps happening. No, well, like, so this has been happening in American, I guess air quotes culture for the past 60 years or more. Like, this has been a recurring phenomenon. I mean, like, I'm actually, like, Manly P. Hall, for instance, is an endearing figure. You have others in the New Age movement. I mean, Jordan Peterson is following in a long line of New Age self-help people. Who was the guy who did? He was like the main predecessor to the secret stuff. His name's escaped me. He was like an American kind of Alan Watts type figure. I can't. His name has escaped me. But anyways, my point is that you've had these figures that popped up in American pop culture for 60 years. So to say like a revival of like a pseudo-Christian New Age movement that would be presaged by Peterson, no, I don't think so. I think it's been a consistent thing. Maybe it dies out here and there, and like Peterson is representative of the next wave of it. Yeah, that's fine, but it's not. Certainly nothing new. Like nothing, and I don't even mean the big picture. I mean nothing new in the past 60 years. These figures keep popping up, so he's not unique in any way.
Yeah. So the reason that I say yes is because I think that human demand for kind of spiritual experiences is not necessarily constant, but it has a certain baseline. And pretty much every existing spiritual institution is completely either morally bankrupt or in a tremendous decline. So you see this immense demand for these kind of alternate spiritualities, these alternate theologies, where you have, like, in the rise in the last 10 years of this, like, recreation of the notion of original sin in the form of privilege. You have the tremendous rise in, for instance, the Orthodox Church in the United States. And I think a lot of these, including the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, are symptomatic of people desiring for a institutional outlet to the sorts of spiritual and religious traditions that are no longer accessible through your standard, honestly, completely hellish, like Episcopalian church or something. So I don't know that, like, this reifies in like a wave of, I don't know, like new religious movements in capital letters. Like, you do see a lot of kind of odd cults popping up, like the Envixism or whatever, and some of the other ones that have recently been in the news. But I think that, like, these sorts of spiritual longings are going to reify in increasingly visible and institutional ways. Peterson certainly isn't generating that. I think he's symptomatic of that. His popularity is symptomatic of that.
Yeah, this is like what happened last time. I actually agree with everything Hank said. What Peterson represents, it is another resurgence of that, filling the void in the loss of direct spiritual experience that Americans have had. I mean, there's a reason New Age, America turned to the East in the 60s, partly through the influence of Alan Watts, who, no, is not an American, but was immensely influential. I think Peterson represents that. And I think the thing about Peterson, though, that the reason I find the guy pretty disgusting, I haven't really followed his content, but the way he parlays that into this, like, political commentary, I find to be pretty gross. I think
it's great because he
would be a pretty neutral force filling that void, but then he starts commenting on politics.
Well, the reason that I think he's especially great is because it's so incredibly clear when he crime stops himself that it impels people who've already taken the leap, mind you, of like, oh, this guy who is known as, a neo-Nazi effectively, like, beyond the pale of respectable opinion, certainly, like, I'm going to listen to this guy. So after you've taken that leap, it's like, okay, well, I'm following along. Oh, what's this? Solzhenitsyn wrote another book? And wait, okay. And we just stopped. And why is that? Like, the fact that his advocacy has very clear and circumscribed limits is a great thing, because it fucking highlights those to the point where they're visible from space. And I think that it naturally leads people to look especially at those boundaries in a way that if he was more perhaps consciously cynical, he would give a reasoned dismissal of. But instead he does this weird thing where like he literally will just shut down the conversation, and it raises more questions than it answers.
Yeah, Hank and I have like privately debated this for a while now. Disagree with Hank, and my position is that the people who need a Jordan Peterson spiritually are the people who are not given to the kind of critical thinking that would recognize what is indeed very obvious, as Hank points out. They would easily pass it by because their guru asked them to pass it by. But that's, I guess, a debate we can have elsewhere. Next question.
This comes from Titus.
What's up, Titus?
Welcome back to Twitter for the whatever nth time. The emergence of the sexual revolution coinciding with the violence of the Vietnam War certainly explains the social dysfunction of the 70s. Does that include the rise of serial killers like Bundy and Gacy? I have some thoughts on this, but you guys go first.
Adam, I'd love to hear your thoughts. We've been talking amongst the two of us for a long time here.
Yeah,
sure.
Go for it, Adam.
I think the 70s are not easily explained by one causal factor. I think the sexual revolution preceded the 70s, and it was arguably in the 50s, in its early stages, maybe even earlier than that. With regard to the serial killers in the Vietnam War, I think the war definitely messed up society in America, no question about it. But my opinion on serial killers has sort of taken a turn recently. I never really had much of a thought on them, to be honest, but it was, I thought, just, bullshit that the media would talk about. I mean, of course, there's always murders, and so what's so exceptional about these people? I think the media, though, was, and this is a theory that I've heard, they were being prompted, potentially, this is a theory, I don't have proof on this, but by the intelligence services to create villains for basically the FBI to go after. And as you may have noticed, there's no longer any serial killers in the news. It's all about terrorists now. So I think that's sort of evidence in a sort of circumstantial way why that theory might hold water.
Yeah, I think the construction of like the notion of a serial killer is very recent. Until the 1950s or something, like nobody actually found it credible. Like it was a widely dismissed phenomenon amongst like criminologists and police, government authorities, etc. So, I mean, when you talk about like quote unquote the rise of serial killing, like I question whether that actually happened or if it was just discovered, and obviously there's a huge selection effect there. I think it's a little bit too memey to kind of link that to, quote unquote, the violence of the Vietnam War. That's like, I don't know, that strikes me as some kind of like a, Chomsky or like Michael Moore talking point. Certainly not to cast insults, but I think like the actual mechanics of these things aren't as metaphysical as that.
So my take, well, first of all, yeah, serial killers were the original serial killer is, of course, Jack the Ripper, but there's a lot of mythology and questions about what was going on there. Was Jack the Ripper, one individual? Did these killings have a purpose to, detract from some kind of elite crimes of high society, which was portrayed in that Sherlock Holmes film, which I remember recommending to Titus. I think I got it wrong and recommended the wrong movie. I think I recommended Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, but it was a different one. It's the one where they have the Jew is the one who will not be blamed for nothing, the graffiti bit. I don't know if people have seen that. I forget the movie that it was the correct one, but it was like a Masonic conspiracy amongst the British elite to detract from some kind of illegitimacy scandal. They were like just killing random whores. I mean, Jack the Ripper ultimately only killed, I think, like 6 women, allegedly. But yeah, there was like a meme, basically. There was a zeitgeist of serial killers in 60s and 70s, and I personally would like to do a show on this, and we can hash this out further. It's something I've been meaning to do for a while. I wanted to talk about a lot of these guys, but we recently did an episode on Laurel Canyon, and we used Dave McGowan's work heavily, and Dave McGowan wrote an interesting book on serial killers called Program to Kill, which postulated a link between the Phoenix program and serial killers. And so some of those people who popped up killing in their involvement in black operations in Vietnam. So we'll get to that, but I would just say in general, the kind of modern conception of the serial killer is basically a sexual conception, right? I mean, it's killing for lust. It's not killing for... It's a sadism and a lust that motivates this. That's the archetype that we're dealing with. So does the sexual revolution relate to that? Of course, because the sexual revolution is about the unbridled fulfillment of lust. And if that lust includes, some throat slashing or some raping of underage boys or girls or something, then yes, it does. And it's more palpable to society at large, which is what I was mentioning, is a phenomenon sold by the media. It is fundamentally sexy. I mean, how many documentaries have been made about this? There's like whole channels on television dedicated to passion-driven, sexual murder type crimes. One of them is called I think ID, Investigative Discovery or whatever. These things have always been a hit. I'm sure some of your girlfriends like to watch these things. I've watched some in the past.
Can confirm. Yeah, women love this shit.
So, next question. Thanks, Titus, by the way.
This comes from Spurgio. Given to China's extremely low trust within their own population, in your opinion, will they be able to scale institutions to achieve world hegemony?
Ooh, I wish we could ask Ethnarch about that. We'll probably have him back on shortly. I can't really comment on that. It's not my area of understanding.
I would say it's plausible. Institutions are adaptable. They've shown a lot of facility in managing their internal economy, their internal social dynamics, their internal economic growth. And when you tack on the things like the possibility that they're going to be crapping out a Mandarin class of CRISPR-enhanced babies in 20 years, I would say that it's hubristic to decide that there's something so unique about the Western genotype that it's impossible for a coherent subgroup of Chinese to figure it out.
Yeah, who the hell knows? I mean, they said Japan was going to take over, and it didn't happen. I think Asian society has fundamental weaknesses that are not being exposed at the moment because they're still the lowest cost producer in the world. I think once that changes, I think their weaknesses will become more relevant, and I think the current leader of China is also taking it in a direction that is not economic. It is more militaristic, and that is usually the sign of sort of the zenith of an empire, and then it starts to decline. When I look at the United States, I mean, the United States used to be an industrial superpower, and now everything's in China and Mexico, and we've focused on our military for well, we, the people in Washington have, to the detriment of the country as a whole. And I think that could happen in China. I don't know. It's hard to predict these things. They definitely have issues. The people often describe this to Malcolm Gladwell, but I think plenty of people who have lived in Asia will know this for a fact, that Asians don't take criticism very well, and especially at the top. And if you have a leader like Xi Jinping, who's now placed himself in command for life, he is sort of removed from any criticism. And that leads to problems in a society when they're actually taking a lead. What they've been doing is basically catch up. And if you just look through, a catalog of manufactured goods, it is basically the genius of the Chinese brain to reverse engineer all of these products, but none of them were invented in China. I mean, next to none of them. And it's a question of what are they going to do when they have to invent. So I think they're going to have issues when they reach a scale that is actually no longer sustainable, and many people are predicting that is today. I don't know when it will be, but I think it's predominantly, their power is essentially because they have a lot of very hardworking people who have a low boredom threshold, or high boredom threshold, I should say, who are willing to do repetitive work. And I think once you reach that sort of point where the world doesn't need any more tennis shoes, or they've basically taken in all of the factories from every other country in the world and they're all broke, and so China literally has to scale down. I think it will be a question of what are they going to do. I actually do think that they're not going to be able to lead in the sense that America or Europe in a broader sense has, because I think the Chinese dream is not as compelling as the American dream or the European dream. I just think it's a very uncompelling vision of the world. I mean, what is it? I mean, it's like Tiger Mom. You're gonna beat your kids effectively, verbally, until they get the straight A's. I don't think it's a very exciting.
Adam, who does
culture.
it need to be compelling to?
Well, that's the sort of assumption of America where people want to come here. It's like people are voting with their feet.
That's the implicit aspect of the American dream meme. Chinese hegemony doesn't need to be compelling to anyone outside of China. It doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be sold.
It's not even that compelling to them. It's only compelling insofar as
it's their nature. It's compelling to their nature because it is their nature. It's an expression of
why do so many of them leave with bags of cash and buy real estate in the West? I think they see the problems in China.
It's a it's a continuation of it. They're just going where they can maximize their profits and stuff.
Yeah.
Overseas Chinese have been a thing for like 400 years.
Yeah, they've always done this. They're not going to become, Americans or whatever. They're going to get some sweet deals.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I think that it's a very closed society, and I think there's going to be limits to that society growing for reasons I've stated before.
I don't think it could dominate the world. I can say that much.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it has the ability to dominate the spirit of higher life forms.
And that's kind of what I mean. It
has the techniques to do it, but it doesn't have the spirit to do it.
Right. It's Genghis Khan.
Hegemony at its peak, couldn't quote unquote dominate the world. Like there's That's like a technological infeasibility even now.
So. What do you think, Spurgio? Let us know. Can you guys give info on your intro? I was most curious of the last couple audio clippings in not English. Well, that language is Russian, but I don't speak Russian, so you'll have to ask somebody who does. The person that actually composed the audio for that was Alex, as it turns out, and he does speak a little bit of Russian. So there's one more reason to go find him. I speak
as much Russian as Alex does.
Well, you translate it for us at a later date if you don't know it now. But I have no idea. It's a guy and then a girl. So you tell me.
We might have a new installment for season 2. I don't know. I haven't gone over this with Adam, but I have some ideas for a season 2 intro.
Oh, I think we're past season 2, but we'll talk about.
No, season 2 would be 200. Right? It would be like after episode 200 would be season 2.
Wow. Well, that's a stretch goal. Sure.
What, that we'll get there, or that? What do you mean?
No, it's just more than twice our output right now. So it's
we're not. No, it would be one. Sorry, I'm sorry. You're right, Adam. It would be after episode 100 would be season 2.
Well, we can. No promises. That's a good intro. I think Alex did a good job.
It is a good intro, but
yeah. All right, so I probably should get through some of these quicker because there's a lot. So this is from Banter Chad. Have you listened to Bowden? Well, of course we all have. How much do you think he influenced modern alt-right thinking? Probably a little bit less than what he should. Personally, it looks to me as if all modern alt-right talking points were first articulated by Bowden and through him to Spencer Johnson et al.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely a fan of Bowden. I think that his influence is more for people who have a literary bent. I mean, he was very good at sort of conceptualizing a default rightist take on various artists of the 20th century. I mean, that's really what he did. I mean, the bulk of his legacy was his criticism, his literary criticism, criticism on pop culture. I would predict that Bowden sort of becomes a forgotten figure pretty quickly, which is sad because, again, I'm a fan of him. But I don't think that he's so divorced from anything that is going to be the practical political concerns that are driving, younger people and new people into sort of right-wing dissident politics. I don't know if Bowden is about. I think he'll always remain sort of an interesting figure for people who are into the arts, but I wouldn't say he has the main political influence on the dissident right. I would actually concede that to people like, at least in the American context, I would definitely concede that, despite my own problems with a lot of their work. I would concede that to the more radical paleocon types, like the Derbyshires and even the Jew Paul Gottfried and people like that.
All right, next one. This comes from Remote Control Militant at Bacana Fighter. I've seen him quite a bit. Hey, what's up? Question: how much of our current situation determined by our tech level? Is there another way to be post-Malthusian? Will the internet help or hurt our situation?
I'm going to say that you can model like the last 20 years or so of American political history as people slowly coming to the recognition that the internet enables certain forms of coordination that were not previously possible, and the response of the system as they desperately try to control that medium without making it apparent that they need effectively a police state in order to do so.
I think this question can also be interpreted more broadly if you include things other than infotech. I mean, I think obviously the fact that America is the second fattest country in the world is mainly due to the fact that we have the Midwest that is basically thousands upon thousands of square miles of raw food producing acreage. There's just a surplus of food, and the fact that we can harvest it so efficiently is, I think, the fact that it leads to the fact that the price is so low, and also food is an opiate for people, and it's literally handed out to people for free to keep them loyal to the system. So, sure. Does tech influence our current situation? Absolutely. The feminization of men, I think, is again due to this sort of lack of stress placed on people's daily lives. So you don't really need strong men to go out there and chop trees down. It's basically already done for you. You just sit in your chair and you type on Twitter or Facebook or what, for God knows what. So it's we're living kind of in a very decadent system that I think has a lot to do with technology. Is there another way to be post-Malthusian? Yeah, sure, but I think people are like water; they take the easiest path, and so I don't think it's going to happen until they're forced to.
All right, next question.
This comes from John Sobieski. Johnny Sobieski. The Argentina paradox can most likely be associated with a decrease in the European population. How did this come about?
There's a fantastic article on, I want to say Vidier, that essentially describes the Argentine demographic transition to illegal immigration from Brazil. I'm not sure if it's actually Vidier, but you should look it up. That this substantially changed the white proportion of Argentina in the early 20th century.
Yeah, I never considered that. I basically, my theory on why Argentina, which was the richest country at like the turn of the, I always get this wrong, but 1899 to 1900 kind of thing, they were like one of the richest countries and not the most rich countries. And then they quickly fell behind. Why, though? That's kind of the question of the Argentina paradox. I basically think that the economy was basically just agriculture, and they were basically growing because there were still some open portions of Patagonia that had never seen a cow in its existence, and so they literally plop a cow on top of it, and now that land is productive, and so the GDP goes up. I think once you reach the ends of the sort of land limits of Argentina, and you're not a manufacturing or Silicon Valley, oriented economy, you're going to have limits to your growth. So that's sort of my long-standing theory, but I'd never considered the immigration. Okay, next one. Hetero Beowulf at DSA Cyber Nazi asks why. Why has the academic establishment ignored Oswald Spengler? I think that's a good question.
Oh, okay. So
the academic establishment ignores all sorts of shit. Like, I mean, that's an easy answer. It's like, well, because Oswald Spengler was basically a Nazi.
Yeah, I mean, they can ignore whoever they want to ignore. Oswald Spengler's a great influence for me. I think he was probably the greatest philosopher of history of all time. He is easily dismissed by the academic establishment because he's largely an autodidact.
I think it's because he's a pessimist. I think the progressives don't like him because he basically says this whole experiment in the West is a disaster, or at least it is now. It's reached its sort of a depression, or I want to say apotheosis. I can't remember if that's the right term, but basically it's sort of at its bottom. So, and then he sort of doesn't even have any hope for it ever really picking up, from what I can tell. I mean, he called this book was like Der Untergang of the West. So that's like the downfall of the West. We call it the decline of the West. But,
yeah,
the German is much more dour sounding.
To some extent, it's a mischaracterization of what pessimism is. But, I mean, that's a subject for another time. Yeah, like they have reasons to want to ignore Spengler, but he just doesn't fit into their methods of historiography and understanding of what the West is and its place in the march of history. So he's definitely someone they'd want to ignore. And I mean, he was panned largely when he published initially too. In other words, he's an easy figure for credentialed, respectable academic establishment to ignore. He is somebody who can effectively be dismissed as a crank, and they have every reason to want to do that as well.
Okay, next few are from D. Schmidt at Dagar_Schmidt. Farming in my area was done in the past with very little in the way of inputs. Now it uses chemical pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, and fuels. What do you think about the instability that this can create, as well as the longer supply chains now normal in the West? It's kind of my type of question. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts.
Definitely. This is definitely your question now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, farming has changed. The efficiencies of using industrial scale farm equipment and the petrochemical industry to augment the minerals and ingredients in the soil has basically tripled the output of the soils. And they're going even crazier now with infotech on the stuff, to the point where they're using satellites to plot out yields and try to optimize, on a sort of per square foot level. I mean, it's getting pretty insane. So what is the question? What do we think about the instability that this can create? Well, I think it's very fragile. I mean, I think it's basically a system that depends on a lot of very complex inputs. And so if you don't have that supply chain working, which is very easy to disrupt in a crisis, you're going to have a lot of production losses in terms of yield. So what do you do? Most people have no options, but I would say if you're sort of a fortunate enough person to own land, I would say learn how to plant a garden and go from there. But, that's all I would say. Yet another question: can political systems and values be pulled to the right without deprivation and war, or is the left wind a result of material abundance and lack of struggle? I would say maybe both, but what do you guys think?
Like empirically, yeah, they can be pulled to the right. I think that's happened numerous times. There's a question of the kind of it really gets down to like, okay, on what time frame are you talking about? Like, what's really the long term? Like, can you have a sustainable, consistently right-wing political system that's immune to internal shocks? And that's an open question. But I mean, yes, is the short answer. Obviously, you can have Trump is just the most recent example. And certainly there are more kind of historically salient examples before that, including the most historically salient of them all, of course. Sustainability of institutions is an open question.
What was it? I'm sorry, Adam. Can you TLDR me that question? I was ordering a pizza.
Yeah. I think Hank answered the first part. I'll just read the second part.
It sounded like Hank answered it well.
Yeah. I think he covered it. You can listen to this next one. If we consider the cathedral, the dominant religion, truth system, and dissident right / NRX as the main insurgent one, is the dissident right NRX more like the early Christian church, early Protestantism, early Islam, or something else entirely? Well, I think D. Schmidt is an NRXer. That's my guess. But you guys, what do you think?
That's a mighty loaded question there. I don't know that you need to like it. That's so loaded that I don't know if I have a good answer of it, because it sort of like posits that like, okay, so there's an existing quasi-religious foundation to present society, which like obviously is true. Like there's this kind of bizarre church of progressivism that formulates the basic moral precepts of society. But I think the positing NRX as like a coherent enough alternative to that bakes in a lot to the cake that I'm not sure is actually edible. You could just argue by counterexample. Like obviously there's no Muhammad, so it's not Islam, and it doesn't seem like there's a Jesus, so it's probably not early Christianity. So therefore, if you analogize it to like, okay, so the early Protestant Reformation is basically driven by like Germanic power struggles where they needed a new ideology. I guess I'd have to go with early Protestantism then.
Yeah, it is a loaded question. I would say that from NRX and other broader dissident reactions to what's happening. I mean, it's been going on for a while. I mean, since the war, and then more acutely expressed in the post-war era, there was an intellectual reaction. But the problem in general with American dissidents, and why I don't think a comparison to a religious cult is viable, is that for the most part, American dissidents, when they come to some kind of intellectual apprehension of what's been going on and how fucked they are, there's not a lot of lifestyle changes that take place. You know, these aren't people who go martyr themselves or go live together in any kind of commune or create any kind of institution that they all belong to. In order for me to accept comparisons to new cults, new religious formations, I would need to see actual lifestyle and behavioral changes that come from dissident ideologies, which I have yet to see. I mean, most of the stuff that you have...
I see this. They're
you
like,
do?
Yeah, especially the surrounding memeplex. Like, I see people make legitimate life improvements once they realize.
Yeah, but those are
that
individual. Those are personal.
Sure, I mean, so, and part of this is, like, part of these new ideologies is a response to atomization, but that atomization still exists in a lot of places, especially when people are geographically dispersed. But I do see people making a series of positive life changes that have kind of a consistent portfolio behind them. Once they realize they've been consistently lied to and start looking for explanations. So, I mean, I don't know if that rises to the level of intentional communities are failed. Intentional communities just don't work.
No, I mean, I'm not advocating that people create a monastery or something per se. I'm just saying that, I mean, they have worked in the past, actually.
Sure, but in the last 200 years.
No, I mean, yeah, the last 700 years, there have been those have been instruments of significant historical change. However, in America, they tend to end with, I don't know, everybody lying next to the punch bowl or whatever at best. And when that's your best, I don't know, man. But my point is, those lifestyle changes, yeah, they take place in terms of, I don't know, diet and exercise and that kind of stuff. But
don't underestimate that, man.
Yeah.
When you're a heavily armed, jacked, right-wing beast, you become by default a political entity.
Look, I want all of our listeners should become heavily armed, jacked, right-wing beasts. That, I support this 100%. But the formation of a new sort of, something bordering on the historical importance of, religion, I don't think it quite rivals that, because I have in American society, it doesn't really take a hardcore enough form. It's more of a hobby, as at best, that self-improvement stuff. Yeah, it takes place, but it's, this is a side hobby, and they do their gig or whatever. It's not a total life change. It's a tinkering around, doing your best, whatever. And that's all good, man. But no, I wouldn't compare it to the advent of a new cult, personally.
I mean, I'll say that right now, Protestantism is winning in the magnitude departments.
Yeah, that's true. I would only say that it's a little bit too early to tell, but I would say that, yeah, as it stands, it's not there yet. These things always take time. I mean, you got to remember, the religions were cults at one point. I mean, obviously, Jesus and his disciples were, they were punished.
Oh, so, that means, I'm not using cult, by the way, as a disparaging term. That's when I say cult, I mean that in an objective term. I'm not I'm not saying this is a bad thing per
No, I
se.
got you.
People can have their opinions about, Protestant Reformation or whatever. I mean, I think it would be cool if you walked into a deli and you could do a hand sign to somebody to know that, you're on board with the struggle.
Well, there is a hand sign, but it's probably not advisable at this point in our political climate. But there are many others to be discovered.
A ring, you position your ring a certain way. I don't know, man. I'm just saying, no, I don't think the dissident ideology is approaching the status of a new religious cult. Not yet. It may get there. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Next question from Jack at Plus is my own boss. How did we get so absolutely BTFO'd by the first and second Arab invasion? Well, I can sort of pontificate, but what do you guys actually know?
Well, I mean, I guess I wonder if by first he's talking about Muhammad, which there's ample archaeology, I guess, behind that. But basically, the Byzantine Empire had fought a series of wars immediately before with the Persians, and they were both in the kind of containment zone of that thing. So they had weakened themselves to the point of exhaustion. The second one, I think there's kind of ample pathology. If by the second one, I'm assuming that he might mean the current one.
I think he may not, but I think it's certainly an interesting case we could discuss briefly.
Well, it's the lack of European unity. It always was. I mean, it wouldn't have happened.
I would say Europeans are very united in please come in.
Right. Well, they are now, but I think historically,
you're talking about
that's more the question.
Original the Arabs would not have become a dominant force in Europe, in the European Empire, or what should have been the European Empire, without lack of unity. I mean, that's
sure. I mean, they conquered Sicily. They conquered
rivalry is what caused the fall of Byzantium,
right,
and vice versa. I mean, if by the second Arab invasion he's referring to today, then it's the same problem. It's a lack of European conception of itself as a proper power and entity that does not need Abdul, walking around the streets doing whatever the fuck Abdul does.
I think there's two things going on here. I think I agree that the unity is part of the issue. I would sort of make the analogy to sort of like software patches fighting each other. I think there's sort of European version 1.0, which was sort of, I guess, Rome. I mean, of course, you could make delineations on what that number should be, but the point is the incremental change after that was disunity, and then even more disunity now on the sort of defending side, where you have these people who are not only ripe to be conquered, but they're letting them in to be doing the conquering, which is the state of affairs today, which I think is because of the sort of propaganda. And we don't have to go down the road of sort of pathological altruism. I think that's, whatever. We've talked about that. But
I've made my position on that clear. I should state for the record, I don't believe that Islamic conquest of Europe is possible.
I think there'll probably be a backlash. You'd expect it to be sooner, but it's like
Jewish conquest of Europe is possible. Jewish and capitalist liberal conquest.
Well, I think that's already
is proceeding,
happened.
but I don't think that an illiberal Islamic power could establish itself in Europe. I mean, maybe in X neighborhood, as people always point to, but not as a real state or a real
the
power.
Other thing I was going to say,
believe that's possible because you have two enemies for that. You have the true enemy, which should be the true European idea, and then you also have the liberal powers themselves. They couldn't tolerate that either. So I don't believe it's possible.
Okay. The other side of the equation I was going to address was the sort of software running on the firmware, the wetware of these young Muslims, men in particular. Which I think the reason Islam became so successful was it was basically a promise of booty in terms of women and material and spiritual rewards for conquering. It is a very aggressive
no doubt.
Ideology, and I think it promised a lot of these men a lot of things they were lacking. And I think the nature of the Arab societies being polygamous compounds the recruits to this system, because the only way you're going to get a wife is by expanding and taking women from other societies, because there's always that sheik who's got basically the lion's share of the women in your society. So the only way you're going to get a woman is by invading, Germany on New Year's Eve. So I think this software program is a fucking virus, and it's compounded by the fact that fucking Zionism is screwing up the minds of the defenders. So you got a weakened defender and you got a emboldened attacker. Well, that's going to lead to problems for the host. So, what do we do?
Zero disagreement there. That's completely correct.
Yeah. Well, Jack, if you have any thoughts on what to do, that's the real question. Okay, so Boomer posting nightmare at Boomer posting spelled wrong 1. I guess there's a lot of Boomer posters on Twitter. Which 20th century figure do each of you think has the greatest impact on the world? Okay, so I have a few in case there's some duplicates. So go ahead.
Impact? That's a
man.
good
question. Contrarian takes incoming.
Let's clear up the question here, though. Impact. What do you take that to mean, guys? Adam and Hank, what do you? I mean,
yeah, that's the rub. It depends on how you interpret it, but I think
we should be answering the same question.
I'll roll with it. It's subjective.
We should all answer the same question.
This is a canonical.
No.
This is a canonical. Like, everybody give your hot take question.
Whatever. Yeah, go for it.
Give your hot take, Nick.
All right, you first, Hank.
I think I know what Nick's answer is, but go ahead.
I'm going to take a hot take. I'm going to say Norman Bourlag. So
I actually had that one.
Really hot take, Hank.
I had that one in my back pocket. Yeah. Go ahead, Hank. Explain it though.
This is Mr. Feed the World, right?
Norman Bourlag. He was a scientist, a humanitarian. He won a Nobel Peace Prize.
Isn't there a movie called The Agronomist about him? Is that about him, or is that somebody else?
Yes, he was a famous. I've never actually seen that movie. I've only read about him. But he was an agronomist, and he developed several series of highly nutritious and hardy blends of grains and rice, various other things. That effectively allowed a massive third world population to feed itself, and led to a lot of the demographic accelerationism that we currently see. So, I mean, if you consider, I guess, the influence of the 20th century figures as primarily upon the 21st century, I think that he has a pretty good claim for the greatest impact on all of us in the next 20 or 50 years.
Yep, I think that's a good choice.
That's a very hot take, Hank. Adam.
Well, I'm struggling with this because I could just do the raw numbers, and there's a lot.
This is one of those. I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is one of those questions I wish we had more of our. Well, we only have one other guy now. I was gonna say the rest.
To be determined. We may expand, contract.
Alex,
but
no, we're not expanding. We've gone over this. I refuse. Alex can either come back or we're a former crew.
Nick is putting his proverbial foot down. I guess so. Whatever. Just we can't.
But my point was, I'd like a round. This is a great roundtable question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Adam. I'd like to hear what Hans had to say, but Hans couldn't make it.
Why did you interrupt me again? What was the point of that? But okay, so I was just saying that the way I sort of try to think about this was just numerically. because you can emotionally, this person spoke to me, but how do you really like broaden that out to everyone in the world? I think you really have to have some objectivity there. And, you could think of all the wars and stuff or the great leaders. But the one because I figured Nick will have, a few that are probably in that category. But the one I sort of settled on was Tim Berners-Lee, who made the World Wide Web arguably possible. He probably wasn't the only person involved. But, if you just wanted to pick a guy who's like the internet as we know it, I think the internet has been incredibly transformative, and I think what we're doing now couldn't have been possible without the World Wide Web, and it can't be underestimated. I think it's really just the way our society is sort of evolving around right now and reshaping itself by making these peer-to-peer connections, which were never possible. I mean, it's unparalleled. It goes beyond the printing press, which was more of a mass communication medium. This is really a broad mass peer-to-peer system. So I think the internet has to be accounted for.
Yeah, you guys gave great examples. I think that at the end of the day, you guys are both right that the impact on. I mean, I can't necessarily name the key figure. Borlaug is a good example. I don't know the guy you mentioned, Adam. But it was techniques that really determined what the 20th century was. I mean, you could name, as my friend had submitted earlier, someone like Werner von Braun. But I think at the end of the day, yes, the 20th century goes to techniques, but in a more traditional sense, like who was the human figure, who was the great titanic figure of 20th century history, was of course Adolf Hitler. I
mean, I don't disagree. I mean, he reshaped. He reshaped everything.
There's no discussion of 20th century history that doesn't come back to Hitler. What's the
Godwin's law?
Godwin's law. Yeah. Like Adolf Hitler overshadows all discussions of political history of the 20th century. However, I think you guys are more correct. I think that 20th century really does belong to techniques, and you could name probably a lot of people. I don't know, maybe.
You could even say Tesla, Ford or
Henry
Rockefeller.
Or yeah, exactly.
It's really hard.
I think
Steve Jobs. Even.
I think the masters of techniques dominate 20th century history, but in the sort of more classical great man of history, look at it. Of course, Adolf Hitler. I mean, that's an obvious answer. But
and to back Nick up, I mean, it basically broke the British Empire. It created the Russian Empire for 70 years, and it kind of allowed the spread of communism. It made America the imperial sort of force it is today. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So I think
it was the defeat of National Socialist Germany, spread of communism. But yes, end of the colonial era. All of these key changes to European history of the 20th century, they come back to Adolf Hitler. So yes.
Okay, next one. This comes from Bruce Miller at B. Miller Heavy. What historical example can we learn the most from? That's kind of like akin to the previous question, but it's a little bit harder to answer, I think. So,
well, it's akin in the sense that we roll with Hank's subjective response to it. Because when we say we, because my immediate reaction would be the IRA.
I would say it's good.
I would say the IRA because the IRA.
We got consensus.
the only example of white men defeating a world power, or at least bringing a world power, just victory or defeat. That's a debatable question. We did discuss this a little bit a long time ago, but it's the one example in 20th century history of white men defeating of white men with little means defeating a world power. So I would say
that's true. I would say Zionism is incredibly.
That's another good answer.
Instructive.
We're going to be talking about this as a preview. We're going to be talking about that this month with our friend from Rebel Yell, Henry Mankin.
Excellent. Hank, did you have any quick one, or we can keep going?
No, I don't know what challenges. Well, actually, I do have one, but I can't say it on the air. Let's stick with the. I think both of those are excellent examples.
Cool. All right, this is another one from D. Schmidt at Dagger Schmidt. What nations from the past do you think most mirror the current United States? Pre-war Spain, Weimar Germany, Rome, end of the USSR, something else entirely? Well, I think all of those are good, but what do you guys think?
There's no exact parallel.
Yeah, I agree with Hank totally. I think America's completely unique in that sense. Complete terra incognita.
Like you don't historically get to have a completely isolated island power. Even England, they've only been quote unquote invaded 3 or 4 times over the last 1,000 years. But America is 0, and it's not really practical to do so. And to combine that with the position in the world, economy, and the population that it has, the natural resource base, and the domestic political instability in the context of the international situation, you can take fragments from all these other analyses, but it defies easy parallels.
Yeah, I agree. All right, this is from our friend Johnny Mack, who sends me a lot of emails, but if you're listening, Johnny, I can only read or keep up with so many, but this one was a question for this show, I think, so I'll read it here. Let's see. Is James coming back on in the future? James LaFond. We certainly will be happy to have him on.
My pizza just got here. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, I will say yes, but TBD.
Right. Here's another question. You can answer it, Hank, and Nick can eat his pizza. Question, really vague, but it allows interpretation. What action by a country, individual, and or group, it can be either or, has had the most profound and long-lasting effect on the world? It can be for good and or bad, and it can include multiple answers. In my humble opinion, it was God himself, Jesus Christ, rising from the dead.
Cool.
But it's a question for you and the guys.
Sure, I'll go with that. No, give me something with a hotter take possible. Just ramp it right up. No,
yeah,
no, Come on.
What did T.J. Miller's character say in Silicon Valley? Jesus Christ! Ever heard of him? King of the world. Yeah, let's just go with that.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go with the resurrection.
All right. This one is about William Joyce, which I think is for Nick. So when he comes back, we'll go back.
I can't speak to.
I can't either. All right. This is from Almost Esque. Banning is good. At Banning is good. Do you buy the idea that there is an etiological and foundational myth for each civilization? If so,
yes.
What do you think it is for the post-war neoliberal world order?
So the founding myth is World War II.
Yeah.
Obvious.
Yeah, post-war, sure, yes.
That's our historical epic, in the same way that the Iliad is the historical myth of Greece. Contemporaneously, it probably wasn't constructed that way, but a better example would be the I actually don't know how to pronounce this. The Aeneid of Virgil.
Aeneid. It's whatever.
Right.
What was the question? I missed that. Last I heard was
what is the founding myth for our civilization in the post-war neoliberal world order?
Yeah.
Ooh,
you know what?
Star Wars. Duh.
No, come on, man. That's an excessively hot take.
No. It is Star Wars. Because everything, Star Wars was deeply mythological. I mean, obviously, everyone knows Lucas himself was a student of Joseph Campbell. That's the archetype that you see. I mean, and yes, he ripped off, for instance, Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress, but that mythology was the key mythology. I mean, it was he ripped off the Hidden Fortress, but to a limited extent, because the point.
Okay. Like, okay, so that's like part of the mythology, but that's like the, you know, that's like claiming that one of the random like Greek tragedies is like the Greek myth.
No, it would be if it wasn't repeated over and over and over again every time they wanted to get the point across. It's the pivotal reference point, because what it is, it's about plucky rebels who, in truth, are actually very powerful, defeating some, morally criminal empire and replacing it. I mean, that's the myth. It's like, I guess that's the pop culture mythology answer. The historical 20th century answer is, of course, the mythology of the good war, but they're one and the same.
Yeah. I'll even ascribe it to a specific work. I'll say Ken Burns' The War.
Oh God,
the
that
7-part American documentary television series is the foundational myth concretized of the post-war order.
Well, you saw, I mean, plenty of films got made, like plenty of John Wayne films got made, and after in the 50s and 60s and stuff that were directly about the war. But the reason I would mention Star Wars is because it abstracts that completely from the actual historical narrative, and that's the general founding myth. It's, you have people who are supposed to be somehow underdogs fighting against some power that's oppressive to others or whatever, and then that justifies their primacy on the world stage after the fact. Every expression of American power and neoliberal imperialism is about freeing the oppressed, and the fact that America is morally justified because it defeated Nazi Germany.
Well, I think both of you are correct. I mean, I think the vehicle that Star Wars has become is pretty obvious at this point for the neoliberal propaganda. I mean, the most recent ones, I haven't even seen them. I mean, the sort of prequels were abysmal, and so I just sort of gave up. But what I was hearing from people was, oh, they got a black stormtrooper, oh, they got a woman who's Luke now, and I'm like, okay, this is so
but they're not
predictable.
even they're not effective at the
J.J. Abrams says, there's too many white people in Star Wars, I need to change it.
None of
that's Christ, guys.
None of that's effective, because when people ask about myth, it's not about like historical realities, it's about the stories that we tell and how we conceptualize.
We don't
ourselves.
tell them, but what America has become is sort of a dumbed down slave civilization that does.
Yeah,
tell
anyone
this.
who identifies Hollywood with America, they're seeing it as a we, and the Star Wars is probably the key, the quintessential Americanist mythology about rebellion and fighting the empire or whatever. I mean, I would say, like, if you were teaching a history class, hopefully in the bright future of 2200 or whatever, I think Star Wars would probably hold up as an instructive historical narrative, and people might not totally understand it, just like when people read the Odyssey or the Iliad, they don't totally understand it. And unlike reading the Odyssey and the Iliad, they'll be like, this is kind of gay and weird. But I think it will typify the Americanist order.
Right. Hans asks us, since he's absent tonight, I'd like to relay a question. What do you see as a currently developing myth that you believe will shape the next century? He describes his answer as the myth of the intrinsic value of everyone as a economic unit fully capable of achieving more worth than negative value. You guys have thoughts?
I don't think the future is going to be Homo economicus. I think that was sort of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, and I think the capitalist system is so productive to the point where we don't need maximization of profits at this point. I think what people are lacking in our society is a sense of worth, self-esteem, community, spirituality, whatever you want to call it. And none of that can be purchased. I think it has to be homegrown in your community by yourself through your own actions, through your own achievements. And I think it has to be done on a different level because the scale at which we're competing is so ridiculous with globalization that normal people can never really feel good about themselves because they're always being outcompeted by either a robot or a cheap immigrant laborer or a tech billionaire or just a malicious government that doesn't care about them. So I think it's going to be more local. If not in a actual community sense, it's going to be on a spiritual level. People are going to unplug from the tech grid that we've used to sort of find each other. But I think once we've found each other, I think people are going to go back to the land. I think that will be more important to people than just becoming wealthier or more popular on social media. I think people need to be happy again.
I think that the myth of white privilege, actually, I don't want to go completely, normie-con tier. Maybe it says something that sort of theorizing is normie-con tier, but I see that as having very real political effects on a very short time horizon, probably in the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, I would say when we talk about a myth of an age, I mean, it's a difference. There's a difference between the myth of the age and the facts of the age, because the 20th century was not actually the century of, the rational individual or that kind of thing. That was a myth of the 20th century, but not the fact. The fact of the 20th century involved, great population movements and great struggles for world domination, even, done by the people who claim to be representatives of, the liberal capitalist order. The myth is what people tell themselves or tell the populations to justify power. So I think whatever comes next is, of course, contingent upon who wins. And if these people continue through the 21st century to dominate, then yeah, of course, I think what Hank said. I think it's going to be the struggle of the colored world against the white devil. And assuming they don't win, assuming that there is some kind of change to that, I think the myth will be something along the resurgence of life, real life coming back in a fucking barren, desolate wasteland populated by subhuman bipedal mongoloids. So, Hans had another question, didn't he, Hank?
Hans had two more.
Okay.
I guess perhaps we'll lead with this one since the answer is short. Hans says, people have been asking us for a while, will there ever be a Waco episode? The answer is no.
Yeah, the answer is no. Hank and I debated this for a while, and I think ultimately Hank won the debate. I would like to Waco post naturally, but I think Hank would like to Waco post. We would all like to Waco post.
In fact, the fact that we would all like to Waco post is why we probably shouldn't.
I would say that Rebel Yell had actually someone who was at Waco during that standoff, and I would say listen to that show.
Yeah, the two main reasons. I mean, A, yeah, it's been covered a bunch. B, we don't want to get raided by the ATF. I would definitely recommend the William Gazecki documentary. I thought it did a pretty good job. Someone else did ask us about an episode on the Order, and I would be in favor of doing that. I don't know. I can't promise that we'll get to that. But I guess a little more obscure and maybe a little more nuanced than the Waco situation. But I don't think we have much. I think everyone of our listeners can surmise what we think about the Waco incident. And yeah, we could summarize it for you guys, but we won't be doing that, unfortunately.
All right. The last question. I think this is a good one to wrap up on. Who is your dream guest and why?
Dead or alive?
Let's just leave it ambiguous.
Bobby Fischer.
Taleb. Duh.
I think I'd actually like to corner Jordan Peterson. Assuming that you could get him to avoid hanging up the phone, I think it'd be interesting to probe the exact limits of his advocacy there.
Well, since my friend mentioned, actually, we missed a question. We probably missed a couple questions. I'm sorry if we missed your questions. But Adam's mentioning Bobby Fischer remind me of a friend of mine's question, which was something to the effect of our modern figures who have been oppositional to Jewish power, who have maintained a pristine reputation. Actually, I'm not sure if he said modern figures, because my answer to that question would be that the further back you go, the more sort of tolerant academic history is of someone's views towards Jewish power. In the 20th century, off the top of my head, I mean, no, there's nobody who made a public issue out of it. There are plenty of people who had, private issues that's been overlooked by the academic establishment for one reason or another. But no, there's no 20th century figure who made a public issue of Jewish power who maintains a pristine reputation.
Maybe Stalin.
Yeah.